I don't want to be working on projects where when I look around, this is the skin tone that is reflected back at me across the producer circle and across the table, across the design tables, especially if we're working with a diverse cast, because that tells me that we're not taking care of the story. If the people that are working on those stories are not caretakers of that community, that feels dangerous to me.
My name is Elisa. If you've never met me, my name is Elisa, and welcome back to Sunday Morning Juice. For those who don't know, today I'm joined by Maggie Whitaker. They are a costume designer who brings a deeply human, research-driven approach to visual storytelling, crafting wardrobes that are emotionally resonant and historically precise. They've had films showcased at Sundance, Hamptons International Film Festival, several short films in Oscar-eligible competitions, theatrical world premieres like Eureka Day and I and You, and they've created a fully accredited BFA and MFA program. They've actually done much more, and I'm so excited to dive into all of that today. Maggie, thank you for joining.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful introduction. That's really, I'm honored.
You're very impressive. Your
Thank you.
career involves work in theater, film, and video games.
Hmm.
That's a range. Where did you start and what was the
Dude.
path like to finding those other parts of the industry?
So, I mean, I started off as a theater rat, ever since high school, basically. That whole, like, my track was auditioning for plays, being terrible, and then being gracefully shown the backstage, and being allowed to work crew, and then figuring out that I didn't have to go through the painful process of auditioning, not getting cast, being a terrible actor. I could just go straight backstage. And then having the good fortune of a friend of mine in high school having their mom be a costume designer and working as the costume shop manager for a small summer stock theater company in my hometown. So I had this really narrow window into this one side of the business that was tangible and allowed me to see a way of being part of the storytelling process, still being really connected to character and doing the things that I really loved best with being in theater and being in the room of working with actors, working with characters, and drawing and reading a whole lot. And then having the struggle bus of not actually having grown up learning how to sew being the hill that I had to overcome, because I was pretty miserable at it for a really long time. I always feel like I can teach people from my place of strife and struggle bus because I've already made, don't want to say I've made every mistake a person can possibly make while working in a costume shop because I don't think I've actually set a machine on fire. However, I've got a pretty significant experience in the being a consummate mess up, to draw on to be able to work from a place of radical empathy with my students when it comes to the tangible aspect of making and building. So yeah, so I come from theater, and then I started picking up a little bit of film work after I got out of grad school, and then I basically really stuck to theater for a very long time until about 2017, 2018. I got offered some contract work basically for a friend of mine's mobile narrative video game company at Storyscape, doing costume design plates of like basically research boards for what was essentially like choose your own adventure mobile narrative video games. The first game I got brought in on was Titanic, and we were creating these alternative storylines and story arcs around the movie. So we would see Jack and Rose, but they weren't the point of these stories. And since it was all historical research, we got to like go deep. And so I was doing that. And then I started my first feature in like 10 years. There's like an unwatchable feature from 2009. It's like never got distributed. So 2019 really was kicking off and it was feeling really great. I was picking up more commercial work. And then 2020 was going to be my year, as it was everybody's. And then some, pandemic happened as we started to come back into work after the, I'm not going to say after the pandemic, but during the pandemic, like around 21, I started to pick up more film work. And that was a really big transformation. A lot of that was thanks to Aggie Rogers really advocating for me in a tangible way when people would be looking for somebody local and they'd call her. She'd be like, yeah, I'm not doing that, but call Maggie. Ever since then, my career has been a really healthy mix of film and theater and mixing between design and doing a little bit of producing or sometimes consulting producing and sometimes more tangible like producing and designing where it's like doing a lot of unsexy infrastructure as well
Mm.
as doing the costumes. And that's really fun and also exhausting.
I feel like it's really hard to be a creative and not be wearing multiple hats, you know? So
Totally.
how do you feel like maybe now the experience that you have with costume design is merging into that work with producing and how they interact with each other?
Some of it really came from being this world in which when you're working in costumes, especially as a designer, most of the time, as from the minute you start working in theater, even and on indie films, it's pretty much the same. You don't really have everybody you need to do all of the components of your job. And in theater, you are running your budgets, you're organizing all your labor, which is sometimes just yourself, quite honestly. You're shopping all of your materials, you're managing all of your fittings, you're handling all of your alterations. You're loading in, you're loading out, so you're handling all of your transpo. You're figuring out the full circularity of your product from the first meeting all the way to strike. And that's how you were practically trained on like a nuts and bolts level of the professional work. It's only when you're working for like higher level theater companies that have costume shops that are fully staffed do those responsibilities really start to leave your plate and you get to do the work that you're hired for of being a designer, of creating a comprehensive design that you are overseeing on a creative scope. So, with that in mind, by the time I'm coming into this work at this point, I've been essentially working as a project manager for myself for 25 years on all of these different levels of scale. And when you take that and you apply that to indie film for something like Fairyland, where we've got 140 looks just on the first three actors, both young Alicia, teen Alicia, and Steve, then you have everybody else plus the extras and all of that. It's that kind of that level of project management of managing a budget, managing where all these resources are coming to, coordinating where labor is coming in and out, tracking continuity, all of that data, plus also having a creative point of view and making sure that the aesthetic storytelling is following through and still thinking about what is the circularity at the end of the day. A moment of beauty in storytelling, there's like this little like, I don't know, like 20% of beauty in storytelling that you hold in your hand and you sort of like nuzzle it and give it love and it's like your little kitten. And then there's the 80% that is this massive thing that you're doing that is conducting an orchestra. Being able to take that and figure out how to apply that to other scopes of work, whether that is running a business or supporting an organization or supporting a production through working in the producer track and not necessarily in the finding money because I feel like I'm allergic to asking strangers for money, but if you want me to figure out how to get sanitation on site, how are we dealing with garbage and recycling? How are we getting trucks someplace? How are we handling the like care and feeding? Where are the resources coming from? How are we writing contracts? How are we taking care of the people on our team? And how are we making sure that everybody has what they need to get the job done? That I can really get behind because that's what I've been doing within my department for forever. And I can also consult when it comes to smaller projects where they're looking at their budget, but they don't really know how to apply their other budgeting knowledge to this department or to these, like how to break down the script and how to really understand what it means monetarily. We don't have the same established rules and handbooks that other key categories have. Like the art department has a handbook that has been written out and is established by their union, their local, and is part of their contract management that defines how many people they have on a team and what are the rules and roles. Same with sound, same with G&E. The costume departments, we spent the pandemic writing that handbook, and for my union for 829, we are still waiting for it to finalize and pass legal so that it can become part of the canon of our departments nationally through designers local for both theater and film through the New York office. And that is going to be a huge opportunity for all of us because it's going to codify the language that our departments are recognized by.
When was the last time that that's been updated before you guys have just rewritten it?
Well, there's not really been a book that has defined our department. There's never
Mhm.
been a full like reckoning of that in that detail to be able to identify what are our best practices. How does this look for theater? How does this look for film? How does this look for the differences between how this works when you're working on the East Coast versus the West Coast? Because there are different practices. The East Coast MOPIC side works based on a lot of established rules and norms that come from Broadway, where the West Coast works on established rules and norms that come from always working from a Hollywood model. And there's a lot of crossover and cross pollination. And there's this whole world of being in the middle of the country that is the mass regionalism. And so how do you create a national set of standards that builds equity for all? I got to sit in on a lot of those meetings during the pandemic because, you give a lot of us a global cooling of our heels and we have a chance to sit down and we can think about ways we want the world to be better. I mean, I think that's a lot of what happened across theater and film is you saw our entire profession really reckon with how to come back in a way that honored the art, but also challenged the lack of equity that existed and would maybe let us reframe how we were doing this work.
That is so amazing. I was going to ask you a question about your activism and how that showed up in your costume design, but I see how it's shown up in so many other ways in like the structure of costume design itself too. Is there any
Mhm.
other way that you feel like it shows up?
Oh my gosh. I think it's some of it's endemic because again, I come from theater, so we don't throw stuff away. We can't afford to. So with that in mind, one of the things that as I moved into doing more and more film projects, like I said, from about 2021, I started to pick up more indie projects. And at the end of these films, it'd be like, well, so where are the clothes going? And sometimes they'd be like, oh, we're going to take them. And I'm like, okay, cool, great. But sometimes they'd be like, yeah, we have no idea. You want them? And I'm like, yeah, I don't want it to go into a dumpster. And so I ended up with a storage unit and then two. And I was like, well, this is crazy. I need to consolidate. So then it was one that was packed to the gills. And then I ended up with like a little studio that was like 300 square feet of heaven that was packed to the ceiling. And I finally had that thing just as I finally got that organized with racks. And I was like, this is still packed to the gills, and I still have half of it still in boxes. My friend Maddie, who had another studio, and she'd gone through the same process, and her films and commercial work had been doing the same thing to her of like they never had a plan for this stuff. So she ended up being like, well, I'm not throwing it away. And she'd been building a rentals business for a few years, and she'd been building this Empire Threads. And so back in September, so it's been about 6 months now, she found a Craigslist ad. Anyways, I'm sitting in our studio, which is this 5,000 square foot warehouse in Oakland that is our Empire Threads rentals, our costume shop, our two design studio offices, we have a dye and crafts room, and we also have a fitting room and mixed use sort of office mezzanine space that it's all like functional rentable space, and we have an education nonprofit here. So the goal is that we can create the infrastructure that is continually being lost in the Bay, so that when we're doing film work in the Bay and we can grow and maintain our arts infrastructure in the Bay, that we're part of the growth and the maintenance process. And that on a fundamental level, like it takes 2.5 years worth of drinking water to make a white t-shirt for like one person's drinking water, just so we're clear, like not like all the drinking water for 2.5 years. So if you think about that in context of like jeans or anything that's got like a pigment or anything that's like a more complex process, like that's a lot of water waste. I really dislike blanket purchasing and dumping clothes, like the buy return process of like fast fashion is kind of hard on me. I have to do it sometimes. It's inevitable. You cannot get away with not spending money on clothes, of not purchasing things. There's an inevitable cost sink because there are times when you need to buy multiples. For SAG and equity actors, they have to have clean undershirts brand new in the package. It's an ethical thing, it's a hygiene thing, it's also a union rule. Like they don't get somebody else's under things. Those are sunk costs. Those are have to be new. But whenever we can, to be able to not have to buy the same white shirt over and over again, the same like business shirt, the same jeans over and over again, to keep those things from going into a landfill, to keep from going into a dumpster for every time that we return stuff to Target, which gives my, it's like I've got to fact check this, but the CEO of Target gave money to the ICE agent that shot up Alex Preddy.
Mm.
I don't want my money going to that dude. Like, I don't want my money going to Jeff Bezos any more than it must. It's some of it is like, I know that I've got a certain amount of fast fashion I'm going to burn in hell for, but like if I can keep it from going into the dumpster, because I've already done it, it's there. I do so much drag. I've done so much low budget, and I can't do low budget drag Fantasia without hitting Fashion Nova because at least they're size inclusive. Again, XS to like 5X in the same sequin dress. Like I need that sometimes. However, I need it to not go in the dumpster, and I need to not be buying like 50 dresses and then sending 39 of them back because it's not going on the floor. It's going to end up in a pallet. And I also like the other part of it is like I don't want to be working on projects where my caucasity is represented predominantly when I look around, that this is the face, like this is the skin tone that is reflected back at me across the producer circle and across the table, across the design tables, especially if we're working with a diverse cast, because that tells me that we're not taking care of the story, especially when I have the privilege of working with like artists of color and working with like trans and queer stories, which is my favorite kind of work to do. If the people that are at, working on those stories are not caretakers of that community, that feels dangerous to me. And when I have been in predominantly white institutions that are trying to create space for artists of color to tell their stories without making sure that they are leading with artists of color at the leadership table, it's a shit show. If I'm in the room, if I'm the designer at that table, I always want to be like, please tell me you have that I'm like your designer of last resort. Like you have exhausted all your opportunities. Like I know that I'm great. I know that I should be here because I'm fucking phenomenal, but I better be the last resort because
Gosh,
you should have worked harder.
yeah.
Like if it's a queer story, at least I've got my cred, but like because I've seen so much harm.
I can imagine, especially behind the scenes. I was looking at your projects on your website, and
Mhm.
one play stood out to me actually, Hooded or Being Black for Dummies.
Oh, that was such a good play. And that one got a little spicy. Like we had the director and the playwright and I all had a meeting of minds about how we were doing characterizations in that play. And we did get into it with the artistic director who was lacking melanin and had a very specific viewpoint about how uh Trey should be dressed. And we're like, no, that's not how it is. That's not what the look is. That's very stereotypical. And we're
Yeah.
not doing that. That's not what we're doing.
Let's
And
dive
we
into that a little bit more. So, for those who don't know, Hooded or Being Black for Dummies is a play about two 14-year-old black boys existing in two different worlds. Marquise goes to a prep school with uniforms and people who don't have the same cultural background as him. And True is street savvy and he lives in inner city Baltimore. So, what was the process like adding elements to Marquise's style that showed his differences culturally? Even though he wore the exact same uniform as his peers.
Well, what was for him, what was interesting was that because he was a transracial adoptee, which was another big element of that story, was that he was being raised by a very well-meaning white lady.
Mm,
So he had no relationship to his blackness at
sure.
all.
You.
And so when True comes into his life, it is this moment where his mom is trying to like kind of help him. She's like, "Oh, I've kind of made a like well-meaning white lady, but she's like kind of knows she's made a kind of a whoopsie of like I have set you I may have set you up for a little bit of fail here. And maybe you need a little um support." And there's this moment where they are sharing where there's a pair of it's interesting because the script calls for a pair of ruby, it's sort of like the ruby slippers, but it's this pair of Jordans that are red rhinestoned Jordans. And the miracle was because we had no money. That show, it was like one of the big fights because that show had like a $1,200 budget. And we have like a Greek god and we have a police uniform. And then we have these rhinestone Jordans, and we have two actors that have to wear them. And the only thing that saved my ass on that was the fact that both actors were both size 12, so they could flip the shoes between them. Otherwise, we
Mm,
would have been skunked.
yeah.
And then I was able to find on eBay a pair of red Jordans that I could rhinestone for under $200.
Okay.
And then we all had to look at them, fit them, say a little like apology to the gods of Nikes and the sneakerhead gods, and make peace with the fact that I was going to F them up and stone them
Yeah.
and hit them with like rhinestones, and they were never going to be cherry again. And then I went and I rhinestoned the shit out of them, and they're like, "That's pretty bomb, but damn, those shoes are done." I was like, "I know, but they're gorgeous. I use Swarovski. I didn't skimp." True's not going to be in like white tank top. And we had talked about it. Like, do we deliver what white America expects in the stereotype? The white tank top, the droopy pants.
Mhm.
Because it's also not what the fashion, it's not really what the fashion in the moment is also when we're doing it. It's like, that's not what they're wearing. They're like, it's like sometimes you're sort of like skinny jeans that are like have a little bit of extra volume at the hem. There's all these different things. Like fashion looks really different, and we're also not entirely Baltimoreizing it. We're kind of like Marin countying it. We're we're making some slight modifications into how we're visualizing it. That's what we did. We made him very fashionable. We did not create a stereotype. We made him really fucking cute and looking like he came correct. And the artistic director sat through tech and he's like, I don't think that's how it is gonna. I just have a note and I really think you're gonna have to change it. And I'm like, well, considering you wouldn't give me enough money for the show, full stop. And the only reason everybody is costumed is because Lisa Marie kicked in this much. Lisa Marie Rollins is the director. And then I kicked in this other because I'm going to take these costumes and I'm going to recycle them to my next show. So if you want more clothes, you can pay me for the stuff that we've already got on people's bodies.
Hmm.
And then we can talk about other things. But that costume's not changing.
You built an entire accredited BFA and MFA costume design program at the Academy of Art University. Beyond technical skills, what do you hope the course influences students to carry with them after they've moved on and graduated?
I hope that it carries like they have a really strong sense of themselves as storytellers and creative leaders. One of the things that I really push with all of my students is that they are seeing not only the role of designer as a focus for themselves, but like the full range of what they could do within the costume department. That there's so many different ways to enter this profession. It's not just theater, it's not just film, it's mixing between those professions, it's going into commercial. There is a world within gaming and animation. The department has been through a lot of ups and downs since the pandemic. One of the things that I've been really excited about is that we've finally got an on-site cosplay crafts class that's being taught by my friend Jamie Wong. We have an online version that's being taught by another instructor, and I feel really bad. I'm so sorry. I just lost your name in my brain. But she's really amazing. So we've been building these really beautiful 3D skills stations for as long as I've been at the school, that don't exist anywhere else. And because we're in a fashion department and not in a theater department, that work has always been at the forefront of people that are coming to the school are going to have a really strong toolbox of construction and specializations within like 3D making so that when they go out into the world, even though they still are going to have to learn how to apply that to a human body, like it's all going to be on dress forms, there's going to be an abstraction that they're going to have to then transfer. Um, but because they've been working in the theater with me in like doing productions, they're starting to in my on my side of it within the design classes always thinking about it in relationship to the human body. So we do costume production courses for the undergrads. They should take it twice. And those projects are always going to be different because they're going to be based on what I can gather in the professional world that semester. It's always going to be real projects. So this semester we did 3 short films in February, and the second half of the semester they are working with my friend Ashley Renee on her design for her musical of Mean Girls. So they are broken up into 2 teams, and each team is working on the breakaway dress for Katie at the kind of basically at the end of the thing where Katie has this sort of like bride's dress, like a bridal wedding dress that's covered in blood, that's like a sort of like a horror costume. And
Yeah,
in the
the Halloween
musical, yeah, it
costume.
breaks away and yeah, it's like an onstage breakaway, like boop, and she's in like her school clothes. So they're learning to do a breakaway. So because the class, and this is the part this semester where I was a little like the most feral version of this class I've ever taught, but they're the most amazing group. half of them are online. So I've got students all the way on the East Coast. I've got students in Utah and Idaho. I've got students in Pennsylvania. I've got students in California. And then I've got 5 students local. And so I've broken them up into 2 groups. They are working on breaking down these wedding dresses. Then they're going to ship them out here. We're going to fit the broken down wedding dresses so that they're like all opened up. And then my local team is going to install the quick rigging and do the finishing work. And we're going to do the fittings and we're going to have the remote fittings where the everybody will be able to zoom in and do the fittings together. Yeah, everybody gets their paws in it.
When you imagine what your body of work means 20 years from now, what do you hope people say about the mark you've left on the industry?
I hope that people feel like my costume designs and my design work really honored the stories that I was telling. I do hope I get a couple of like knockouts where people are like, "Oh, that was a really good piece. That was some really fun stuff." That I'm glad that I'm glad that they got all those great dream ballets in that moment. But honestly, if I am really lucky, I will have pieces where the clothes just make sense and they let the characters live, that they release the story, that the clothes never just sit on the surface of the skin, that they just
Yeah,
melt
they
right
live
in.
in.
Yeah,
I cannot believe we've been speaking for 45 minutes. I feel like the time has
I
flown
know.
by.
This is really fun. Thank you so much.
Oh my God, my pleasure. This has been awesome. I feel like I've learned so much, and I like that we live in a world now where people who do things like costume design have a platform, and I can understand that better. I think that, like, before I didn't even realize how important it is for the story, and hearing how you work and your thought processes, it like really, I love TV and film, and I'm definitely going to be looking at it differently now that I've had this conversation.
Totally, totally. It's going to be like you're constantly going to be sitting there like, ooh, what's going on there? How does that make me feel? When is it boots on a dog? Which it's like my favorite thing from a Christina Spiridakis interview where she was talking about costumes, where she's just like, when it doesn't work because you look at an actor in clothes and it looks like they're all of a sudden it's boots on a dog, where they're like, and I'm
Yes.
like, you nailed it. You nailed it, ma'am. Because as soon as it doesn't matter if it was the best idea I've ever had on paper, if it doesn't belong on their body, it do, it doesn't matter. It's like get it out of
Mhm.
there. If it doesn't help them, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Get it gone. Do something different.
You are so awesome. You are so iconic.
Thank
I am
you.
so happy I had this conversation.
Likewise, you're amazing. Thank you so much, Elisa.
Oh my God, my pleasure. Thank you too. We will speak to you soon. And you guys check out Maggie's website. I'm going to put it right here. Is there anywhere else that you want people to know about you, more about your work, and how they can connect with you if they want to work with you?
My website's great. I also do try to keep posting professional stuff to my Instagram. I still don't know if it's useful or if I'm just screaming into the void. But at Girl Darts, I put that name together randomly before I was even thinking about it as a professional world. So I'm just going to live with it. If there's a new film that is going into festivals, if something is going into theaters, that's where I'm going to probably be most likely to actually be posting that information, just because remembering to update my website is a Herculean task, and I probably have like 3 years worth of shows that have not gotten up there. My backlog is gross, and Angelica and myself, my web designer, and I probably have like a 6 hour Zoom date that we're well overdue for. So we'll see if I get around to it.